Welcome to this demo on Tosca Data Integrity, or Tosca DI as we call it. Today we're going to have a look at how we can do transformation testing and how we address the biggest issue we see today, which is the maintenance of these complex queries. And by addressing this maintenance, this really allows you to expand your overall coverage of your end-to-end data warehouse testing. We're going to have a look at a common scenario where we need to test our transformations and we're using multiple data sources. And before we can even get to the actual transformation itself, we need to do a number of things first. If we're using multiple data sources, we first need to build a number of load queries to pull the data in. We would need to provide some sort of temporary storage and insert the results of all these load queries into this temporary storage so that we can use later. Build a reconciliation query from source to target. So that would be our temporary database to the actual target that we're testing against. And then add all the business logic and transformation testing into the actual query itself. And then we need to maintain all these queries that we've built, which can become very lengthy. Let's first have a look and see how we see it being done today, where we're doing this more manual approach, where we're creating all these SQL queries and we're using maybe a tool like Python to execute them. So first we would need to write all the different load queries, and if you're using completely different databases, you'd have different editors that you'd have to write the different queries in. We'd have to create and maintain the temporary database that we use to store this in. We would need to loop through all the different databases one at a time, pulling the data and saving it into the temporary database. We would then write the minus queries to do the reconciliation from source to target, which would be your target tool, your target database to your temporary database where you've combined all the data together. Then we would write all the business logic in using the SQL query editor. So this results in a huge amount of SQL query maintenance, as well as another tool if you're using that to do the execution from that side. So what we're really recommending here is to use a more model-based approach, and this is what Tosca DI provides. So what we have is you would still start off writing the queries in a SQL editor. This is built into the tool so we can connect to all the different databases from that side wherever they live using one editor to actually create the queries. We have a built-in caching database, so it covers a number of these steps and you don't have to worry about temporary tables or looping through data, anything like that, or even writing minus queries. You can add a lot of the transformations as well, or business logic with some built-in functionality that we have. Some examples are remapping of column names, trimming, taking care of case sensitivity, building in tolerances. All of those sort of common transformations are actually built into the tool, and then you can use the editor to cover the rest. And because we're using this model-based approach, we actually have more templates that are provided, and these are parameterized, and this really gives us a single point of maintenance and addresses this maintenance problem, and it allows you to scale your automation and really increase your coverage from that side. And that's not the end. What about pulling data from files? What if you needed to combine this data into your temporary database as well? SQL querying can't handle that. So we need a way to actually take care of data coming in from XMLs, JSON files, flat files, whatever it might be. And we also have the BI reports at the end. Generally, there's someone there testing that today manually. And this could be a part of the actual data team writing these queries, or it could be separate. But either way, at some point, we need to be able to do end-to-end testing. So we want a way to be able to have one tool that combines all this automation together and takes care of all the data sources wherever they may live. These are the things we need to consider when looking for a DI tool. We need to be able to do end-to-end testing. Most tools just focus on one part of the warehouse, and the BI reports, for example, are separate and they don't cover all the different data sources. And this leads to multiple tools being needed, and it means later on when you want to do end-to-end testing, you need to integrate them, which leads to communication breakdowns and a number of other issues. So we really want to choose a tool that covers all layers, UI, API, and all data source types. And the next thing is the actual complex SQL queries. So what we've seen is the query builders and designers are helpful initially for building the actual SQL queries, but this only covers up to about 60% of transformations at best. And this leaves the data stewards or the engineers to have to complete or write the queries themselves. And as tests, these queries increase, so does the actual maintenance. And the last one here is really the most important, is the maintenance of these complex queries. So before we get started, we really want to understand the technical skills and knowledge required for maintaining these queries once they're created. And really the only way to address this maintenance is having a model-based approach to your automation and having data-driven templates which we parameterize to ensure that less technical or business people can actually go in there and maintain these queries later once they're created, and allowed you to do this on a large scale. Tosca data integrity is a layered approach to data warehouse testing, identifying issues as early as possible with our end-to-end automation. Our solution is ETL and data source agnostic, enabling us to test across all data warehouse landscapes. We create our earlier tests, as you can see in number 1 and 2, using a wizard-driven approach, allowing you to focus more effort on the reconciliation and transformations. We also cover all the different types of report testing from the UI perspective or through APIs, and we can cover any profiling and monitoring as well. But for today's demo, we're really just going to focus on our example we saw earlier, focusing on reconciliation and transformations. So now we're looking at my desktop, and I have our Tosca data integrity overview slide as my background, just so you can see the different types of testing we do at different stages throughout the warehouse. And for everyone that's not familiar with Tosca or Tosca DI, I'm just going to do a quick overview, and then we'll jump right into our transformation testing. So I'm going to open up Tosca, and you can see on the left-hand side is my navigation. And what we have is, that's important for today, is this concept of modules and test case templates. So we support over 160 different technologies out of the box for UI and API automation. We create and maintain our automation using scanners and recorders. It's all business readable, no technical skills required. It gives you a single point of maintenance, and that's how we've addressed the maintenance issue with UI and API automation. And a number of years ago, we brought the same to Tosca Data Integrity, which is our data warehouse testing component. And we can still leverage our UI and API for report testing on that side. So here you can see the big difference is you don't need to create or maintain any of these modules for data integrity testing. They're all provided for you already. And I mentioned already we have a built-in caching database, and we can load up pretty much any type of files to our data source, to our built-in database, or you can provide your own. So a few examples here, we're going to see them in more detail later, but for example, if I wanted to load a file from a caching database into a caching database, there's a model there that allows me to do that for CSVs, for example. There's another one for JSON and XMLs. We can point to multiple databases loaded up, and then we can run our row by row comparisons. And these are the models we're going to use in a few minutes. If I collapse this, that's just technically how we connect to all your data sources wherever they are. You don't need to worry about that. That's all built in. We also provide out-of-the-box templates. So what that is basically, there's our terminology again, pre-screening and vital checks. But if you want to run any of these types of tests, we provide a number of these templates for you. And this is based on our customer experience. We've provided a number of templates. There's close to 50 of them to accelerate your kickstart. So for example, if you want to run field level tests for database to database, and you want to do something like a min length test, if I expand this, you're going to see one example. We can connect to your data sources wherever they are. There's a parameterized SQL query, because we have actually wizards that will point to a source, point to a target, and generate these tests by the hundreds and thousands even. And these are super good for finding bugs as early as possible before you start transforming your data. So more the early stages of the warehouse test, but we can generate these for you. So what we're going to do today is focus on our transformation testing. So I'm going to collapse my template folder here, expand this industries one, and I have some different use cases I've set up. I'm going to open my healthcare one, and you can see all my different folders. These are all the tests I've generated up until the field level using the wizard and the out-of-the-box templates, which you can customize and change as needed. And then you can focus more on the reconciliation and transformations, your report testing, profiling as well. So over here, I'm going to collapse all of these just to give myself a little more space. And these are the areas we want to focus on for today. So we have the test case design, and we have the actual test cases generated. So we're still going to use the templates, and we're going to use data sheets to drive the templates to address that maintenance issue. But I'll start off by going to the end result, just so you can see what does the actual maintenance look like once these are created, and then I'll show you the creation effort as well. So I'm going to jump to my test sheet. Let's collapse this again. And you can see here, I've got a few different sections. Now, I created these myself. If I open up the first one, basically, I'm going to load data from two different data sources. It could be a file, it could be a database, XML, JSON, it could be Hadoop, it could be Teradata, it could be SQL Server, whatever it might be. I just need to tell it I want to load it from two or more data sources. And in here, I've created the structure. So let's expand this a little bit so we can see. And you can see the first one says schema table column. And the second one is basically the same, schema table column. So now this is basically the end result. So what I've done is I've said, okay, I'm going to pull data from different data sources. This is the information I'm going to provide. I have a template within here that'll actually tell Tosca what to do in what order, but this is the actual data piece that I'm providing. So if I need to make changes, I don't need to go into my template. I don't need to go into all the tests it generate, because it could generate, like we were saying, depending on the types of tests, there could be a large amount, and we don't want to maintain all of that, all the SQL queries. This will allow us to simplify it by parameterizing our templates and just coming to the data sheets. And this information you set up here can also be created. You can create reusable libraries and reuse this in other tests, in other test sheets, for example. And I'll show you that in more detail. So, but we'll start off by saying this is the schema, this is the table, this is just the structure I created, but it allows me to say if there's a change in the column for this particular data source, I'll just come into here, I go over there and I just tell Tosca to go through all my tests and update it, and it'll do that update based on this data sheet over here. So it really simplifies the maintenance from that side. I'm loading data from two different sources. In this case, it's databases, but I could also point to a file. Each of these columns represents a test. So this is one test, pulling data from two databases. This is a test pulling it from a file in a database, and these are two databases again. That's the information I have over there that I need to provide it. Once I've combined all that data, we can then run a query that says, okay, I've combined it into my caching database. I can then combine the data using like a join, for example. In this case, it's just selecting all this the columns over here. There's my join query over here from my source, which is the caching database. And then my target will be, I'm just selecting all the data in this instance over here. Okay. If I collapse this, I can then go into my business logic. So first of all, you can see I've got remap column names. And it's a different icon, and I'll show you that in a second. So the reason why it's a different icon is because once you've remapped your columns, you might want to reuse that mapping later. So we can pull out just a part of your test sheet and say, this part is reusable. Let's create a little library and let's reuse that in other areas. And if it changes, we can just go to the library, update it, and it'll roll out everywhere else. But this is my first test. These are all the columns. These are the names for the source. If I scroll down a bit, there's a target. This is what they were in the source. This is what they changed to in the target. And I've just provided that over here. And Tosca will take care of that for me in all my tests. If there's a change to one of them, I simply just come in here, make the change, and again, go there, tell Tosca to update all my tests. That's leveraging this mapping. So that's something we do out of the box. You don't have to write SQL queries to remap them. That's all built in, and I've parameterized it and got it in a data sheet so I don't have to go into the test itself to do it. There's also like tolerance, for example. There's an income field with a numerical value. I can say there's an acceptable tolerance allowed when it does this compare from source to target. You can put that in here as well. That's what I've done. And you can drill down to other columns. And for example, I went to claim mount and do things like trimming, or things like take care of case sensitivity or upper and lower case, whatever it might be, or remove the last few characters at the end. All of those different things can be taken into account. So there's a lot of out-of-the-box transformations we can actually take care of within the model itself. But you can also add SQL querying as well, as we saw over here, to your actual tests. But it really simplifies the actual maintenance going forward. So all I'm maintaining now for each test is these sheets over here, and the test itself is taken care of in the template. So let's have a look at the actual tests first before I jump into the template, just so you can see what it looks like before I created the template. There's a few examples here, and I'll just move my screen. So if I wanted to pull data from a file to and compare it to a database, there's that reconciliation model that we use for that. So you can point to a source. You can see there's a number of options: database, web, HDFS, files, SSH. We can connect your database wherever it is and pull it from that side. So if it's a file, we can point to a file, comma separator. There's a number of options for columns, for headers, for things like that. There's the remapping. I didn't do any here, but it's all built into the actual model. There's some cell options where I'm trimming some headers, for example. There might have been some change when I moved or transformed the data from the file to the snowflake, and it actually added double quotes. I can trim that out. And if I click into here, you can see all the different options, because I only did one in my test sheet, but you can see remove comma, remove dot, all the different options available. So these are kind of out of the box transformations you can leverage. And then again, you can still take care of our editor. If I just open this up, come down to this level, you can see there's a SQL editor. So this is a file, but if I come down here, you can see my target is actually a database. Connect to my database, there's a SQL query, but you can switch over to the editor and you can actually, oops, let's go to target, run my query, and it's going to connect to your database. We have all our connectors already, so whatever your database is, you can use this editor to pull the data, write your query, and once you've written your query, this is quite a simple one, of course, you can then parameterize it into our data sheets and templates. So I'll go a little further here. Once we've done our query, you can see there's some other options, cell options. I won't go into those again. You can do the row key. You can add your row keys that you need, all source columns as well, looking for an exact match. Expand over here. Number of options. These are out of the box reports. So you can create HTML reports from source to target for reconciliation that tells you the differences or where data is only found in source, not in target. I'll run one of these for you so you can have a look. And there's the tolerances as well. So you'll see a lot of these options for transformations are built into the tool already to avoid you having to write SQL queries for this. But you can see there's a whole bunch of options here from source, from files to databases. Here's some from SQL Server to database. You can use time travel functions, load a JSON file, and then compare it to another one. But what we're going to look at is this one here. So this is what the query looked like before I parameterized it. So if I wanted to load it from two databases, let me just expand that. We have an out-of-the-box model that says point to my database, and I just called it multi-source A. Wrote my query, pulled the data from there. It loads it up into the caching database. I've given it my name over there. And then I did it for the second table as well. Different query, loads it up into the same caching database. Once I've done that, then I just use my standard reconciliation model. So it's really simplified. You don't have to maintain these temporary tables or anything. It's all built in this caching database. It's in-memory caching as well. So when you actually load the data, it does it at runtime. It can remove it once the execution's over as well. Nothing's saved on that side unless you want it to. And then I'm actually using my reconciliation model. I'm pointing to my source, which is now my caching database, which has combined my data sources together, and then pointing to target, which could be a file or anything else really, or another database. So what I did was, if you click over here, here's my template. I'll open this up. You can see here, I've parameterized it. So if I wanted to load up a file, it's basically saying Excel, it's saying load data source file path. And then the same as with the SQL query over here. And you can parameterize the actual connection information as well. We can use configuration parameters. We have a whole connection manager as well. I won't go into that just to try to not overcomplicate it for today. But all this data where you see the Excel has been parameterized, pulled out, and put into the actual test sheet from there. So everything from the loading has been done, as well as the reconciliation itself. Now I'll expand over here. And you can see that over there. So even though I've parameterized the file and the database, not all tests will use both, but you can have it all within one template. So one template here can cover a variety of different tests, and you can just control it from the data sheet, and Tosca will generate the tests for you. Okay. So it's all parameterized over there. The end result is I'm only maintaining one template over here. If I scroll up here, you can see I just reused 3 models to do this. You can drag and drop a model for loading data from a file. I'll do that quick just so you could see the simplicity of it. I come over here and say, let's say one of the data files I want to use as an XML. I'll simply just drag it over here. We just bring it back into focus. There's my XML file, and that would be one of the data sources I'm going to load up from as well. as the other ones as the databases. I'm also loading it now from a JSON or an XML file, and it'll flatten that structure for me and allow me to treat it as a table from that side. So that's how I built it. I'll just remove it for now. And the end result was it created 3 separate tests for me, which are those 3 columns you saw in the data sheet from that side. If I go into my first one, it'll basically it'll have all the actual query and everything that it needs to run at runtime. But from a maintenance perspective, I'm not coming into here to maintain it. You can see here as well, there's my mapping from source to target. It pulled this from the data sheet. If I want to make a change, I can simply say, there's my template, maybe do a right click, jump to schema definition. That's my test sheet, and there's my test sheet over here. So I'm going to do a quick change so you can see how that gets rolled out into the actual tests themselves. So if I come over here, let's say to the tolerance, and I want to make a change here, and I'm just going to do something like, let's say it's a 3 and a 3, that we're accepting that tolerance for this numeric. I don't need to do anything in the template itself. I can just jump to this folder, and what it'll do is everywhere that's referencing that number, Tosca will grab the data and go through and populate that, update that change throughout all my tests. So this is why we can use the reusable library for those mappings, for example, or for anything really. That was just one example. So if you have something like that and you've reused it in multiple places, in multiple tests, again, it's a single point of maintenance going forward to do that change. Now I'll do a quick execution just so you could see the test. It's going to run, it's going to load the data from source, from the 2 different databases, combine it together, all in memory caching, and then process it over there. We've got a nice red. This is just running in Scratchbook, so you can see the test that actually ran. It did the load and it failed over there. The log files are in here, but what we want to see is the report generated. If I come over here, double click on that, there's my actual report. It pointed to my source and target. It looked, compared all the data. Here's a nice summary of the actual errors it found per column, and now you can go to the top and drill down to the various tabs. So I'm going to go into differences. You can see there's a it's showing me the first 5. I can load as many as I want. I'll do 20. I can show only the columns with differences, and it'll tell me these are the columns that have differences. So this is all reporting built into the tool. I just thought I'd show you that. But really, the idea of this, if I collapse all that, is really want to focus on the maintenance of these tests going forward to minimize that effort. So I'd like to finish off on this slide again, and hopefully we can now see how Tosca DI covers all technologies and data sources, and how we can parameterize these more complex queries to address the maintenance, enabling you to expand your testing and coverage.